Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is a Magnum swap in pieces. I don't know why there's just like always a fire alarm going off, but there is. Anyway, this is my friend Mike's 1964 Dodge Dart GT. I actually did a video on tuning this thing like a year or two ago. This thing is really neat. The neatest thing about it is, he pretty much built it himself. When I say built it, I mean he did the metalwork, he did the paint, he did the flake, he did most of this stuff. He built subframe connectors. He built his own sway bar. He parted out an F-body for these disc brakes. He made that, the front bumper delete plate. He swapped a correct 1964 4-speed into it. He built his own hydraulic clutch conversion. He swapped in an 8 3/4. He built that panel. He did the stereo. He put the battery in the trunk. This car was an original white and red GT, so in that way it's pretty close to stock, but there are just all these nice little touches, these little departures. It's tasteful, at least I think so, but it's got a lot of character. GT. Now this was an original 273 push-button automatic car. You can see here he also built a delete plate to cover the holes where the push buttons used to be. Lightweight master, aluminum radiator, and it's actually a nice looking one too. I assume that's an eBay special, but I don't know. Line lock, adjustable prop valve, MSD ignition, the list goes on. The 273 left the barn many years ago. This thing had a warmed over 318 in it for quite a while. I think Mike's had this car for 12 years, something like that. And the 318 was in there for most of those. However, doing a burnout outside a bar or something one day, the 318 lost oil pressure. So it came out in favor of this, a 5.9 Magnum. Oh, I forgot. There was also a 360 after the 318, which eventually ended up in this car, and now is in this car. I've made a lot of videos over the years about Magnum swaps. It's one of my favorite things. I've been involved in a handful of them. The beauty of the Magnum swap is it bolts right in place of your LA engine, and aside from a few small details, it looks essentially the same. The passenger side engine mount is one of a couple things that does have to be modified. You can see there the chunk that we added on to account for an extra bolt there. Being a real V8 car, it does have the correct V8 center link, which clears the oil pan. My 1966 Barracuda does not have that feature. The exhaust is some crazy contraption he built. I believe that's primarily constructed out of takeoffs from a 2000s Hemi Charger. Boxed lower control arms, done so long ago, they look, like they came off the Titanic. This was Mike's first real car project. I remember when he was first building it and I was working at O'Reilly, he would call me there like 4 or 5 times a day. To the point that my boss said he's not allowed to call here anymore. Ooh, another neat detail. This headliner was new not long ago, but man, it's looking kind of gross now. Anyway, back to the Magnum. After Mike's 318 bit the big one, he came up with a 5.9 Magnum he wanted to put in this car. He brought it to my old shop, where we started honing it, and quickly realized it was completely full of rust. Being a truly awesome friend, I said, screw it, take this one. This one's in better shape. It only has a little bit of rust. So we honed this one, cleaned up the original pistons, installed new rings, new bearings, and one of those fancy Hughes whiplash cams. Now for the most part, this swap worked really well. In fact, if you go back and watch the video that I did previously on this car, where he took me for a ride along, I was legitimately kind of slightly scared because it is not slow. Mike, why is there a hole in your cowl? Embarrassing. While it ran well, there was one glaring issue with this engine. From the day we got it running, this thing used oil like crazy. It also leaked it. I can't remember what that was. Might have been this dealy, but that is fixed. But the oil consumption has never gotten any better. It has always billowed a cloud of smoke right on startup. Then it kind of cleans up, but kind of doesn't. If you know anything about anything, you could probably figure out where this is going. Generally speaking, when you've got a worn out engine, there are 2 types of engine oil smoke you can expect. The kind you get just on startup, and the kind that happens always forever and is worse when you, say, floor the gas on the highway. The horrible, unending highway smoke, well, that's worn rings, bores. It's oil getting through here into the chambers. The other kind, the kind you get on startup, That is generally oil raining down around the intake valves through the valve seals. You might hear this and think, but you just rebuilt that engine. It's got brand new valve seals, right? Well, yeah, it does. But there's one little problem. In general, on these American V8 engines, there are two types of valve seals we see. The old school umbrella seals, so named because, well, look at them, and the more modern positive seal valve seals. The umbrella seal floats on the valve, like this. Nothing holds it in place necessarily, it just kind of acts as a shield. The modern type of seal actually locks onto the cylinder head. There's a rubber groove in there that grabs onto the metal, and then there's a more fancy looking metal sprung rubber seal at the top there. Both are attached to this metal body. Something really interesting happened when we were rebuilding these heads. The full gasket kit that we got for the Magnum came with these nice positive seals. Unfortunately, they didn't fit on the heads. I seem to recall they were too small and I couldn't physically install them. No problem, we'll just use umbrella style seals. I'm pretty sure I had some sitting around, and the kit may have even come with a bag of them. Sometimes they do. So we came up with these, the exhaust type and the intake type. Here's one of our exhaust valves, and here's one of our exhaust valve seals. Beautiful. Here's one of our intake valves, and here's our problem. It turns out that Chrysler changed the valve stem size between the LA engines and the Magnum engines. I didn't know that. That was a good lesson to learn. Anyway, apparently I had a bag of intake seals for an LA, but they don't fit on a Magnum. It's like a hot dog in a hallway type situation there. Now, when you're comparing the two side by side, it's obvious there's a gap. But when we were assembling these heads, I'm sure we were in a hurry. No idea who's to blame. Let's just assume it was me. Anyway, I probably just popped it on there and went, yeah, good to go. Not realizing there was that big of a difference, and it was completely loose. The million-dollar question here is, why do the exhaust seals fit, but the intake seals don't? And, of course, the $1,002 question is, why did I not notice or care? Yeah, I can't answer that one. Look at how wet these valves are. The way I figured out what was going on was pulling the intake and putting a camera down the ports. There were swimming pools of oil. There are multiple great lessons here. The best one is probably pay attention to what you are doing. Check every piece. Again, the seals that came in this kit definitely didn't fit these heads, but everything else was right. So I have no idea how they mixed that up at the Felpro factory, but it happened. And whether these were also in the box or from my private collection, they were 50% right. So again, I don't know, but it's weird. The intake valves have vacuum around them. The exhaust valves really don't. They have pressure around them, if anything, so there's less of a tendency to pull oil in through those. Even with totally destroyed seals, it's usually coming around the intake valves. We did a super basic, simple, quick, dirty port job on these heads when we built the engine. There's just a very mild bowl blend. Any weird irregularities were knocked down. It's nothing special. It's not going to make 1,000,000 horsepower, but it might make 400-ish. Also, it's got a 3-angle valve job, done by yours truly. So that's your lesson for the day. Install valve seals that actually fit, and they'll work much better. Now all I have to do is reassemble these heads after cleaning the gallons of oil off the valves. Pop the springs back in, of course. Clean everything, twice. And then reassemble. You probably noticed that this thing has factory exhaust manifolds. Even so, it makes pretty decent power. A set of headers would be nice, and it's something Mike's been talking about for literally years. Anyone who knows LA engines really well knows that 360s and 340s have bigger exhaust ports than 273s and 318s. It's not a huge difference, but it is a measurable one. This is the Felpro exhaust manifold gasket that comes in the headset. Look at all that extra space. So with that in mind, we assumed that we'd have a similar mismatch from the Magnum head to the LA manifold. We knew it would be choking this thing down, but, well, we don't really have a choice. So imagine my surprise and delight when I did this. It turns out that the Magnum exhaust ports are not the full 360 size at all. They're smaller. They're actually really, really close to the 318 port size. It's not perfect, but it's very similar. There's a really bad problem with manifold fitment on the left side head in these cars because if you've got the Smoky or 360 head, there's a pad here and the manifold runs into it. It's terrible. But the Magnum head doesn't have that either. Never mind the fact that this one leaks terribly. I don't really know what that's about. The long and the short of it is, manifolds suck, but it could be worse. It's what we've got and it works. So we're gonna put them back in. If we were really fancy, we'd do a gasket match on the port and on the manifold, but we're not really fancy. We're really lazy. And at the end of the day, it's still a manifold. Moving on. Quick break. I had to fix a Fox body Capri. I actually built this little 302 and I kind of like it. It had a dead plug wire. It's amazing how horrible one dead cylinder made this thing run. Anyway, it's fixed now. I know, the channel's not called Dead Ford Garage, let alone Dead Mercury Garage, but I really like Fox bodies, especially this one. It's so chunky. Maybe I'll do a feature on it someday. We'll see. Well, for some reason, it's even more weeks later. I don't know why. It's like I just have to have a broken Mopar here at all times that isn't getting touched. Anyway, back to putting heads together with video magic. I'm finishing cleaning an assembly on the second cylinder head and it occurred to me, you know what? Maybe I should show how I do this. I actually did a video about home building cylinder heads about a year ago, which no one watched, but I showed this. This is the tool I use to break down and reassemble cylinder heads. It's a drill press with a custom dealy bob here that locks the spindle in the downward position. And then it's got a couple of extensions and a spark plug socket, which I modified on the bench grinder, such that you can use this to press down the valve keeper and then install the little retainers through that. I think I got those names backwards. These are the keepers, these are the retainers, whatever. The point is, the thingy presses down on that, and then you install these tiny little bits of metal, which is very frustrating and annoying. I'll just spoil the surprise for you now. Here's the basic setup. Because the valves sit angled in the head, you need the head to sit angled so the valves sit roughly straight up and down, and this thing can be effective pushing down on the retainers. You need something underneath to keep the valve from descending out of the head. I usually use a rag, fills the chamber nicely. And then of course you need something over here to catch the other end of the head so it's not rocking off that way. If you are going to use a rag underneath, try and keep it from getting stuck between the valve and the head, the valve seat. That can be inconvenient and you end up with chunks of rag in there. I've probably only done that like 15 times. Anyway, grab your spring, which hopefully you've cleaned. Hang on, I gotta clean the springs. This probably goes without saying, but you wanna try and keep chunks of grime and horror out of your shiny new cylinder heads. So make sure everything you install is clean-ish. Now my first spring is installed, so I'm gonna slide this under the thing, like so. And then I need two hands. One to reef this tool down, the other to hold it centered. And then tighten this. On this channel, I am not in the habit of recording the really obnoxious swear-laden segments, and this is one of those. You really need this centered around the valve, so there's an equal valley around that valve stem to get the little retainer keeper tiny bits in. There are a couple different ways you can do this too. You can use a little dab of grease to hold those keepers on the valve and then release this, and they should lock into place. Or you can set them down into the opening and then slowly release the valve, and the little notches may or may not catch the groove in the valve on the way up. Here's a demonstration of the grease technique. That little bit of grease will hold them to the valve stem, and now I will slowly release this thing, and hopefully they actually center up and stay put. Easy. Nice. Sometimes, as YouTubers, we can make things look easier than they really are. That's something I try to avoid. So I just want you to know, the fact that that went together easily the first try, it's not normal. They're much easier to take apart than put together, too. A little magnetic tipped screwdriver like this one, and they come right out of there. But getting them back in is this whole other dance, so just be aware of that. This is one of my least favorite exercises in engine building. I'd rather hand file ring gaps than do this. Oh, do notice I've got all of the valves installed in this head. This style seal, the positive seal, seems to hold them in place pretty well. With other style like umbrella seals, they probably won't do that, so you'll also be popping this loose and installing one valve at a time. Yay! Now for the second most fun part, lifting these things into the engine compartment and putting everything back together. Well, that one wasn't so bad. Need to torque all these head bolts and then slide the manifold in and we'll be good to go. The other side though, that manifold's still in place. It's probably gonna be terrible. I'm getting ahead of myself here because there's another issue I haven't even mentioned, and that was an intermittent ticking noise. This is not at all uncommon with these Magnum roller follower lifter thingies. I don't really know what the cause is. I don't know if it's crappy aftermarket parts or oil pressure related, aftermarket valve components. No idea, but it's something we've seen several times. I've gone through and marked the ones that feel squishy. The ones that feel super solid, I think those are probably fine. Now, incidentally, most of the ones that are squishy now were on lift when the engine was shut off. So it stands to reason that pressure from the valve spring pushed down on those lifters, and that's why they're loose now. Not all of them though. This one, for example, completely off lift, but super squishy. If this were a flat tappet engine, we'd be really limited on what we can do here. But because these are roller followers, we can just swap them out. So I'm gonna go dig around in my collection of parts, see if I can find a few spares that seem suitable, and then we'll do exactly that. Somewhere out here in this pile of horrors, I know I have some of these things. What a horrible mess. Oh, I think it's this box. Yeah, there we go. Let's check these out. But wait, there's more. Like, a lot more. Why do I have all these? I don't know. Anyway, the good news is we've got options. This is a set of factory rollers. They might even be the ones from this engine, I don't really know. Now this is interesting. The same number that are squishy in the other engine are squishy here, give or take. So again, it may just be down to the way this thing is oriented when it shuts off, which lifters have pressure and which don't. I do know this thing had valve train noise issues. So at least that one that was off lift, I'm absolutely replacing that with a solid feeling one. We'll take a look at the others and make a determination from there. Also, and this is probably obvious, but these need to be cleaned and the surface rust needs to be removed. You know, if they were stored like not in a damp shed, this might be less of an issue. Now this is interesting. The oil feed hole design to these two lifters is slightly different. Here's the factory one. You can see what that hole looks like and the taper there that leads to it. It's fed by this band. Here's what the aftermarket one looks like. You can see the band is slightly taller. The bevel leading to the hole is slightly wider. The hole itself, I think, is the same size. However, that one is on the same side of the lifter as the oil feed hole from the galley. On these, it's actually off to the side. It seems like that would make a more direct path for oil to reach it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't really know. Well, we'll see if it actually does anything to help, but I replaced these 5 new lifters with 5 cleaned up originals. Hopefully that does something. Cylinder heads. Now I just need to torque those and put everything on, then install the exhaust manifolds, which is really gonna suck. If you know me, you know I love these old school engines. The LA, and of course the big blocks, which are closely related, but larger and heavier. One great feature of those old engine families, shaft-mounted rockers. These things are really strong. Okay, the rockers themselves aren't, but once you get some decent rockers on there, it's a great setup. In fact, you get the kind of top-end valve train stability and rigidity that other manufacturers can only dream of. For the Magnum engine family, though, they abandoned that in favor of these single pedestal mount rockers. They're tied together on a sheet metal guide, but they're individually mounted. This is very, very similar to a GM engine. The only difference is you don't adjust these. You tighten them down and you're done. It is possible to retrofit GM-style arms onto these engines, and you might want to do that to adapt a roller rocker. There are roller rockers available for the Magnum, but they're very, very expensive. Roller rockers for a GM, on the other hand, like a dime a dozen. So this is a common modification. Of course, this is practically a stock engine, other than the cam and the springs. So we're going to be just fine with the factory parts. The one nice thing about this, compared to an LA engine, on these, you just slap them on there, and then you bolt them down. And you don't have to worry about the push rods because they sit in the guides. It's the easiest thing in the universe. Rocker arms are in and torqued. I even turned the engine over by hand to make sure everything was fine, which it is. You can probably hear this. There's a slow popping noise as the lifters I just installed settle into their happy homes. I think it's fine. Now it's time to reinstall the intake manifold before installing the valve covers because they get in the way. I've got these nice Felpro gaskets. I will silicone around the water ports on the ends, and I will use the same silicone, Bright Stuff Black, to create end seals. I never use factory end seals for this. If you're trying to carburet a Magnum, this is probably the intake you're going to end up with. It says Assault on it. It's definitely made in China, and it's definitely sold on eBay, relatively cheap. at least compared to Edelbrock manifolds. The cheapness shows in many places. There's a really good chance this is like literally copied off of an air gap. It sure looks like one, maybe some slightly different shapes in places, but the reason we need it here is because it's a dual pattern manifold. It does have the holes for a regular LA head, but then it has these, the top row of vertical bolt holes for the Magnum style intake. Now, getting these intakes torqued correctly is a bit of a trick. With any part on an engine, you want to carefully go from bolt to bolt, evening out your torque and progressively tightening down a part. But that is especially essential on this Magnum intake, because if you get the bolts too tight on this side, it'll rock it that way. With the bolts vertical, there's nothing holding it in space this way, so you can rock the whole thing side to side and things can get uneven and weird pretty easily. So when I'm torquing one of these, I use a tool that looks like this, and I go from side to side, and I gradually tighten the bolts from center out until I'm satisfied that they're even and the manifold is sitting down level-ish. Then I sneak up on the final torque spec, which I believe is it 12 foot-pounds? It might be 12 foot-pounds. Yeah, 12 foot-pounds. It's actually cast into the factory Magnum kegger intake. Verifying that online was kind of tricky. On the Magnum Swap website, magnumswaps.com, something like that, they list the torque spec for an LA manifold, which is 35. Don't torque these to 35. If you follow this method of crisscrossing from the center out, as you return to the center from the outside bolts, you will find that they will have loosened up. That's because the manifold is slowly settling into place. And that is why I do this. I'll do it 8 to 10 times, center out, always crisscrossing side to side. If you just take your torque wrench and torque the bolts to spec once, it's not going to do what you want. In the Felpro instructions, it does specifically say to snug them down a couple times first. I just kind of take that to the extreme. Now, I'm not actually ready to install the valve covers yet. I need to get the manifolds and manifold gaskets in and torqued, and then install the spark plugs. But while I'm thinking about it, I want to point something out here that is totally not right at all. Mike has his PCV valve running from this valve cover to this port. This port is for brake booster vacuum. It doesn't matter that the brake booster vacuum simply connects to this one port. But with the PCV valve on that individual port, any crankcase vapors, barring some reversion, are going to get pulled into the number 8. Of course, the PCV valve's job is to limit the amount of oil that's able to flow through this hose, but any that does is going to end up sucked in and fouling up the number 8 plug. That's not good. You really want to split those crankcase vapors between all cylinders, and the way that's going to happen is by using a port on the base of the carburetor. All of your standard 4-barrel carbs, like this fancy Performance Holly that we had custom built for this project, are going to have a central PCV port like that. Carter Edelbrock carbs actually have 2, one nipple on the front and one threaded port on the back that you could use for the same purpose. I think generally you're going to want to run your PCV to this one. Incidentally, I recently encountered a Performance Holly carburetor that did not have a PCV valve port on the base plate. Funny enough, the manifold it was sitting on didn't have any central ports either. It only had a runner port like I showed on this one. In cases like that one, what you need to do is get a carburetor spacer that sits under the carb and has the threaded port that you can use. Well, now it's starting to look like an engine again. And I'm taking a break. It's a whole row of garbage I worked on before it ended up here at its final rusting place. Not to suggest it doesn't belong here, I'm just saying. It's fine that I wasted half the day. It's a terrible day for a test drive anyway. I'm back at it. All kinds of things have happened. Rerouted the PCV hose, plugged off that nipple, carburetor's on and bolted down, this valve cover, that exhaust manifold. Just about to jump over to the other side, but I'm hooking things up anyway. Various hoses and clamps and what have you. I just happened to notice this little bit of fuel staining. So I took my socket to the rear bowl screws on this thing, and they were totally loose. Let's see if the front ones are too. Yes, they are. How has this thing not been on fire? This is a Holley 750 double pumper with a Proform center, and as you can see, some fancy purple parts. This was custom built for us by a guy in Washington. I definitely can't fault him for those screws being loose. This thing has been on this car for like 5 years. Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Procrastination Garage, and this is the driver's side exhaust manifold that does not fit correctly. While we were taking this thing apart, I related a tale to Mike about how I had recently had to grind a chunk off of a cylinder head in my 63 Dart convertible to make this same driver's side exhaust manifold fit. The issue is, the manifold runs into the head down there and it can't actually reach the ports all the way. I told him it was fantastic that the manifold did not run into this Magnum head because it makes life so much easier. Well, it turns out this manifold runs into the Magnum head, so that sucks. You know, if I had been paying attention to the exhaust manifold gasket, or lack thereof, when I took it apart, I would have known that. All right, it obviously isn't that big of a leak. Yeah, there's some exhaust staining there, but it's not that major. Either way, we need to do something here. Now, the thing to do would have been, you know, deal with it when it was still apart, but we're way past that now. Remind me to snug up my valve cover bolts on the Demon. Just normal cork gasket things. Anyway, I think the way I'm going to deal with this is go out and get a set of that style header gasket there. They're made by Remflex, and they're a good bit thicker than the factory gaskets. Well, I say factory gaskets, but actually factory these things didn't use gaskets. That's another story altogether. It's kind of hard to tell, but the manifold is contacting the head right now, and you can see how big that gap is. As you start tightening the bolts, the manifold twists up that way, and it'll probably contact up there at the top, but not at the bottom. So my hope is that the thicker Remflex gasket will fill up that opening, which at that time will be like kind of sort of wedge-shaped. The beauty of those Remflexes is they do crush to help close up uneven surfaces and such, so hopefully that'll be good enough. It's either that or we stack like 3 or 4 regular gaskets like this in there, and I don't really want to do that. And then I can get back to putting new plugs and wires in it. Unfortunately, Mike got the wrong plugs and wires. You see, these Magnum heads use a Magnum specific plug. It's a 5/8 hex instead of the old school 13/16. I think the thread depth might be different too. Either way, the fatter plugs don't fit in the round openings in these heads, so you've got to use these. These MSD Street Fire wires have been on this thing forever, and we happen to notice during disassembly, I don't even know where it is, but one of the tips is like coming out, and I think there's a burn spot. Yeah, probably that from where it's been rubbing on the manifold forever. So we're finally going to replace them. At the same time I'm dealing with all that, I'm going to make a change that makes almost zero sense to like many people watching this and install this Edelbrock carburetor in place of that fancy double pumper. For science. I know I mentioned that we had this double pumper built for this thing. Mike's complaints have always been it's super rich and grumpy everywhere. It's cold-blooded and horrible, and just generally he doesn't like it. The big thing right now is he'd really like a choke, you know, so the thing will like start and run. So we're going to throw this on here and see what we get. This is only a 650, but the good news is it looks nice and it's almost new. At one time, he really, really wanted my MSD Atomic EFI system to put on this car. I'm glad I talked him out of that. I'm really not a fan of this aftermarket EFI stuff. I only still have this system for reasons. I'm a big proponent of these Edelbrock carbs for street cars, and that's exactly what this thing is. It's got a 323 gear in the back. It does have a 4-speed, which is nice, and this 360's got a bit of a cam. It's not that we can't take advantage of this awesome double pumper, but on the street, we almost never are. So the Edelbrock's a good choice, and we can easily tune it with the tune-up kit I've got on the shelf. The 650 might be a little underwhelming for this engine, but it's gonna do just fine. Downgrade complete. Yeah, at least it looks nice on there. And make sure you tighten down your carburetor hardware evenly and don't reef them tight either. My body count on cracking a base plate in half is only 1. I did have to fix another one that a guy who worked for me broke though. It's my lucky day because this thing's already wired for an electric choke. Nice. Oh, I'll definitely be adjusting this. I think I've mentioned this before, but you want that line like on the 3rd check mark up from the middle. That seems to be just about right. In multiple cases, without making that change, I've seen chokes that don't actually fully open. And in some cases, the cold idle will stay engaged because that little arm doesn't swing out of the way. So you want to check for that. Oh yeah, there's a list. Check. Check. Probably fine. Not doing. Check. Well, okay, checking off exhaust leak might be a little premature, but I think I've got it figured. Here's one of those thick Remflex gaskets. Note, I had to take a chunk out of it with a cutting tool. That way, that chunk of manifold that hits the head will swing past the gasket, and hopefully that will fill the gap. We'll see. The good news is these are only $40 if I screw them up. Plugs are in. I even gapped them. The manifold's tight against that Remflex gasket, and I think it's going to be good. It's at least going to be better. Yeah, I'm doing the delete on these ancient Street Fire wires. They look terrible. I have this nice set of lightly used 8mm Pertronix flamethrower wires, so I think that's a good choice. Here's how I do wires. Some people carefully go one by one, replacing a wire at a time so they don't get them mixed up. I just kind of rip them all off and throw them in a pile on the ground. Note, I did mark the location of the number 1 wire, and because I know the firing order of this engine, which is 18436572, and I know where those respective cylinders are, I could just lay out the new wires going length by length. I always go short to long, and hopefully, unless I count wrong, I'll end up with everything in the right place. This thing is going to be due for a cap and rotor. The button in that cap is kind of worn out. I went to my stash and I found another cap that looked better. It had no button at all, so I guess that means this one's going to do just fine for now. These wires are for a normal Chrysler socket style cap, not for the MSD, which is GM style. Mike, why is that clamp loose and has clearly been off for a long time? This thing had a nice American-made belt on it in fine shape. But it's at least a 1/2 inch too long, and the alternator adjustment bracket was all the way adjusted. So I'm switching to this decent Mexican-made 1/2 inch shorter V-belt. I'm really styling Mike here, supplying him with all kinds of shiny new parts and going above and beyond, solving little problems he didn't even know he had. And that's what I'm going to tell him when he asks where his fancy custom-built double pumper went. The procrastination around here is just amazing. I really need to get under this thing and replace the snapped exhaust flange bolts, but I don't want to, so now I'm cleaning the engine compartment. Seriously, dude, this is just embarrassing. Yeah, I'm already bored of that. If I just leave it half clean, does that still count as a favor, or is it more like a slap in the face? It's not just good, it's good enough. Except for the hood, I'm not going to do that. Mike can do that. I'll just keep that out of the shot and declare mission accomplished. There's just nothing like cutting chunks of brand new $70 spark plug wires off, is there? I've demonstrated custom fitting spark plug wires before, so I'll save you most of the details. It involves the crimping tool. It looks like this. Some very, very careful measurement and routing and attention paid to where wires go, making sure they're off of the exhaust, things like that. I had what I decided was probably a genius idea. Get every wire fitted individually and then stick them together so I can just streamline crimping and attaching ends and then just throw the whole odd side on. Repeat for the even side. I think number 5 ended up just a hair short once it was tied in with the other ones. That's my bad, probably. We'll see what happens there. Might have to redo that one. Luckily, I've got some really long offcuts from these wires. I seriously don't know how I got that wrong. I guess that's why you're supposed to measure twice and cut once. Anyway, I rerouted number 5 back around the cover and it barely reaches. I don't like it, but I'm gonna let it ride for now. The parts guy finally showed up with my fuel hose after what felt like literally forever. Wish I could get this more like here, but that would require a clamp or something. Even like out here over the exhaust, it can't possibly be as bad as this. And this is holding up fine. Just getting out of control with the zip ties here. I do like that routing better. Of course, now my fuel hose is right next to this heater hose. I did space them apart with a zip tie, so hopefully it keeps from boiling fuel too badly. Ideally, this would be a metal line that goes all the way down to the pump. More future mic problems. Wires? Wired. They're even less bad on the passenger side, so that's good. Well, it's days later and I'm under the dart, attaching the exhaust, which is now done. As you can see, it was challenging. While I'm here, I want to point a couple things out. The first thing is this. This is the flex plate from the late Magnum 5.9, something like 96 to 03 or whatever. It's for the automatic transmission and it has the balance weight attached to it. The way I've always balanced these old school 4-speed flywheels to work with the Magnum 5.9 is by turning this surface and this surface down so that the flex plate fits on there. And then it can be sandwiched in the middle as a balance plate. I've actually been asked about this multiple times recently, so I wanted to show that. Now, I did a whole video on this called Magic Trick That Shouldn't Work like 2 years ago when I did this swap in my Charger. I put this same flex plate in front of this same flywheel, and it worked out great. That car was actually fuel injected and everything, so I needed the windows for the crank sensor as well. If you're installing a Magnum 5.9, you need to use this flex plate for the correct weight. The LA weight is different. I don't know how much different, but I know it's different. So you need to use this. If you happen to be putting the Magnum 5.9 in front of a torque converter, an automatic torque flight transmission with a torque converter that has a weight on it, you need to take that weight off and use this flex plate. Do not use both. That would be bad. Another thing I want to point out, Mike said, I think I need a better shifter. I think you need a shifter that's firmly attached to your transmission. This is an issue I've seen many, many times. On the Demon, I've had to tighten this hardware like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, let's say, over the last couple years. So if your 4-speed shifter is all sloppy and terrible, make sure you check these nuts. It's kind of an ongoing issue. Ow, come on. My voice sounds terrible today. Anyway, here we go. Let's see if this thing fires now. Hey, what's that horrible mess? You know what? I don't actually want to know. Yeah, that's not enough. I'm fully anticipating a giant cloud of smoke on startup, but hopefully after that, our smoke issues are over. Maybe this is what he meant by a better shifter. This thing feels so sloppy. Like just loose, and also the gates aren't aligned right. Let's see if I got the firing order right. Nice. Let's check for gas leaks. The clacking noises. That's fun. Anyway, anytime you replace like fuel lines or filters or carburetors or fittings, anything like that, you want to test fire it like that and then look for leaks. That has saved me multiple engine fires, probably. All right, now I'm going to fire it up, back it out. We'll let it run for a bit and see about fiddling with the screws on this new to this engine Edelbrock. The cold idle's way too high, but the hot idle's close. Well, it's still kind of noisy, so that's the good news. Someone should tell Mike that this pedal setup is like awkward and embarrassing. There you go. It's pretty much perfect. All right, it smells a little rich, but it seems to be what it likes. This is how to set your cold idle. Take the cold cam, take it off of that highest spot onto the second highest spot, and then adjust this screw so it idles at about 1500 RPM when the engine is warm. That should give you the right setting when it's cold. Nice. Other notes, lightly bottom these out, back them out 2 turns. That's probably going to be the right setting. It's perfect for this engine. You may need to go into 1.5 or out to 2.5. Anything outside of that range, you have a problem. Choke stove. This one's adjusted here. The standard adjustment is the big line here. I always put them here. If you don't do that, the choke never fully opens, as you can see here, and it'll hang on cold idle longer than I like. So I always set them there. Works really well. Here's a technique I've demonstrated multiple times before. Loosen these screws so the doors can just barely move. Rev the engine. The doors should pop up. Notice they aren't popping up on this? I think it's got too weak of springs for this engine. And this camshaft and the amount of vacuum it has. Yeah, they are popping up, but not readily enough. Now here's the thing I need to explain. Apparently, you don't leave the screws loose. You tighten them. Someone heard me say that and actually really thought I was suggesting you leave those screws loose. I can't believe I have to say this, but don't leave the screws loose. I'm going to put standard orange springs back in it and we'll see what that does. I bet it helps. This thing seems to have plenty of vacuum. But again, what you want to see when you blip the throttle like that, you want to see the vacuum pistons pop up. That's transitioning the needle from the lean cruise side to the rich power side. Yeah, these are lighter black springs, like super light. These are 7547 needles. I have no idea if that's what we want. Maybe not, but we'll find out. And the way we'll find out is seat of the pants, of course. Maybe a plug read, maybe. But first, brunch. Oh yeah, the car moved, so I can install my lift now. That'll be fun, I guess. I think I said they're black. They're actually blue. Those are the 3-inch Mercury vacuum springs. These are the standard orange, the middle of the road. Probably going to go with those. Those work for me in most cases. Unless it's some ridiculous radical camshaft, of course. This tune-up kit is for a Thunder Series 800 CFM Edelbrock. The springs are all the same. The needle and jet sizes vary a bit between the different kits. And the chart here, this chart is specific to that series. I don't have the 650 chart, but I did go look online. And apparently that 7542, or whatever the needle is actually the stock calibration. Let's test the cold idle. Might actually be a titch low. There's a really annoying clunking exhaust sound, but that, like many other things on this car, not my problem. You know, that really isn't much top end noise. Maybe it's gotten quieter. Yeah, there's a little bit there, but the fact that you can hear it may even be down to this intake design. Anyway, let's watch the doors now. See, they're popping up with some light throttle. That seems right to me. This may be obvious, but with weaker springs keeping those from popping up, you're not getting into the power section of the needle as quickly, and that could cause it to run lean in certain conditions. This thing currently has locked out timing. I think it's set at like 34 degrees. Might be 36, I don't know. It's been a while, but it runs pretty nicely, so I'm just gonna leave that alone for now. Put the air filter on and go drive it. Also, hope that the fuel tank isn't empty. The air horn's shorter on the Edelbrock, so the bolt doesn't reach. Also, that's a drop base designed for a Holley carburetor. Always have to be careful on those. Make sure it clears your fuel line and your throttle linkage. Sometimes on the Edelbrock carbs, it doesn't. Fixed. Yeah, he wasn't kidding about that one. There's definitely oil in it still though, or it wouldn't be leaking, so that's good. Yeah, the rest of that's a later problem, I guess. You know, I'm kind of into white early A bodies. I definitely prefer those ones, but these are pretty cool too. Should I point out all the bubbles in the Bondo on this quarter panel, or would that be rude? I looked into the mile-high accelerator pedal situation because that is truly terrible. It's a pedal ratio issue. Not even exactly sure how that happened. It's a later Chrysler pedal. Oh, well, it's been modified. Anyway, you actually have to get it all the way to the floor to get full throttle. It is cute. Yeah, it's cute. Seatbelts are a feature this car does not have. This shifter is the worst. Like, I don't know where anything is. I think if you just sort of like waggle around and push forward, that's one. All right. I'll assume that 2 is here. And then 3 is like, yeah, there someplace. There's a lot of pedal travel in the brakes. I'm gonna try the magic self-adjuster trick. You back up and then slam on the pedal. And then you repeat that like 3 times. Yeah, I don't think it did anything. So many exciting noises in this thing. The clutch is weird. It's a custom-built hydraulic kit. I think it's like a Nissan master and slave cylinder on a random bracket that he built, and it sits at an angle and pushes on a homemade fork extension. It's weird, and the effort is up there. Sounds pretty good. Yeah. Tell you right now, I'm smelling exhaust. I think that's why he put exhaust leak on the list. I'm pretty sure this car doesn't have a trunk gasket, and I'm pretty sure that's actually the problem. When you don't have a trunk gasket, especially if your pipes don't extend all the way out of the back, like in this car, for a second, that exhaust tends to just get sucked up into the trunk and it comes back in at your face. Yeah, sport shifting this thing. You don't have full clutch disengagement. And I can tell that by the way it goes tunk into reverse. So yeah, that makes sporty driving challenging on top of this situation. But the handling is great. Oh yeah. The clutch pedal is screwy. The brake pedal is screwy. And the gas pedal is screwy. Oh, and the shifter. Other than that, it's pretty good. Huh. Someone did a big drifty burnout onto the road. Wasn't me. It's the kind of thing I would do. Anyway, this thing's pretty sweet. And the good news in all of this is it is no longer billowing smoke. I never saw any smoke at all on startup, actually. I expected some residual stuff, but no. I'm really only hearing a very slight amount of tappet noise now. I'm gonna call that just fine. My brother's Fury has a 360 LA roller cam engine with Magnum heads on it under the hood. And it has always been a symphony of valve noises. Years ago, my friend Chris had a 360 Magnum in a 73 Dart, and it was always a symphony of top end noises. Might be fuel pump time. Or something. Just wait till the haters get a load of this plastic filter. And this one. People hate those plastic filters. It's kind of hilarious, actually. You know, I gave this thing the slosh test, and I swear I heard lots, but the empty looking filters, yeah, those don't inspire confidence. So I'm gonna head for home. If I can find first. Yeah, this is not full clutch disengagement. And because it's goofy hydraulic stuff, I can't even adjust it. Terrible. Whoopsie! It's pretty fun, I guess. Anyway, as I'm sure you can tell, there's plenty of room for improvement. It's pretty decent though. How do you like the horrible reflection of the super heavy flake shiny dash? It covers over half of the windshield, including all of the parts you need to see through. The little hot rod mirror is absolutely worthless. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. It definitely isn't out of gas, so I'm not sure why the filters look so empty, but I'm guessing it's fuel pump time. There's no pinging, so that's good. I can't find any gears. Can I have second? That's second. There we go. I remember from following this car years and years ago that after you use a turn signal, often the left brake light, I think, just doesn't work. And you gotta wiggle the stick. That's a common feature of early turn signal switches, and I don't really know why. There. A-body parking. Right where it belongs. Well, it didn't run out of gas, so that's the good news. I'm gonna say it's fine for now. This car is cool, but also I'm tired of looking at it. Anyway, there you go. Another small block Mopar fixed, a unique Magnum problem to look out for, and some more tuning stuff. Just normal Dead Dodge Garage things, you know. It sure looks nicer in here, and that's great. Anyway, hopefully you found this useful. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. And I'll see you there. Until then, thanks for watching. And remember, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Other than that, it's a pretty good car.